My name is Samantha Parker, and at 32, I thought I understood the rhythms of Basalt Regional Medical Center in Lava Springs, Idaho. As the lead clinical coordinator for the cardiac unit, I'd spent 6 years navigating the delicate balance between patient care and administrative demands. The mountain air outside our windows carried promises of healing, but inside these sterile corridors, something had begun to shift. It started with small discrepancies that made my skin prickle during morning rounds, equipment orders that didn't match our requisitions, uniform allowances that seemed to evaporate from departmental budgets faster than they should. The kind of details that most people overlooked, but after years of managing clinical operations, I noticed patterns where others saw coincidence. Diana Underwood had been our discharge planner for 3 years, and I'd grown to trust her completely. She managed the unit's staffing budget and overtime assignments with what seemed like meticulous care. Her office sat adjacent to mine, separated by a thin wall that allowed me to hear her phone conversations about patient transfers and insurance authorizations. Diana always stayed late, always volunteered for extra responsibilities, always had a ready smile when administrators walked through. But lately, those late-night conversations had taken on a different tone. Hushed discussions about processing fees and administrative adjustments that didn't align with our standard protocols. When I'd casually mentioned these overheard fragments to our unit manager, Jessica Underwood, she dismissed my concerns with a wave of her hand. "Diana's just being thorough," Jessica had said, not looking up from her computer screen. "You know how complex discharge planning has become, with all the new insurance requirements." The explanation felt reasonable, but my instincts disagreed. 23 years in healthcare had taught me to trust those instincts, even when logic suggested otherwise, especially when the numbers didn't add up. Last Tuesday, I had noticed Diana accessing the supply management system during her lunch break, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. When she noticed me watching through her office window, she'd quickly minimized the screen and offered that familiar smile. But her eyes held something I'd never seen before, a flicker of calculation that made my chest tighten. The cardiac unit's budget reports had been arriving later each month, and when they did come, they contained line items that seemed inflated beyond reason. Uniform replacement costs that exceeded our actual orders, equipment maintenance fees for devices we'd never serviced. Small amounts individually, but collectively they painted a picture that made my hands shake as I reviewed the spreadsheets. Yesterday, I'd found myself staying after my shift ended, ostensibly to catch up on documentation, but really to observe the patterns I couldn't quite name. The hospital felt different in those quiet evening hours, when most of the day's staff had gone home and only essential personnel remained. Diana's office light stayed on long past her scheduled departure time, and through the thin wall, I could hear her making calls that definitely weren't about patient care. "The processing will be complete by Friday," she'd said to someone, her voice carrying a confidence I'd never heard when she discussed legitimate hospital business. "The documentation looks perfect. No one will question the allocations." My pen had frozen above the patient chart I was pretending to review. Allocations. That wasn't discharge planning terminology. That was financial language, the kind used in budget meetings and administrative reviews, the kind that made my stomach drop when spoken in hushed tones after hours. This morning, I'd arrived early to review our department's financial records more carefully. The numbers told a story that made my coffee taste bitter, and my hands tremble as I scrolled through months of data, equipment allowances that had been manipulated, uniform budgets that had been systematically redirected, small amounts that added up to something much larger, much more deliberate. Diana had arrived at her usual time, greeting me with that same warm smile that had once made me feel like we were partners in providing excellent patient care. But now, watching her settle into her office chair and power up her computer, I felt something cold settle in my chest. The mountain air outside promised clarity, but inside these walls, the truth felt murky and dangerous. I'd built my career on trust and collaboration, on the belief that we were all working toward the same goal of healing and care. But as I watched Diana begin her day, accessing systems and reviewing files with that same practiced efficiency, I realized that some betrayals happen slowly, quietly, hidden behind familiar smiles and professional competence. Something was very wrong at Basalt Regional Medical Center, and I was beginning to understand that I might be the only one who could see it clearly. The question was whether I had the courage to look deeper, knowing that what I found might shatter everything I thought I knew about the people I worked with every day. The silence in my office felt heavy with unspoken truths, and I knew that by the font of this week, nothing would ever be the same. The investigation began with coffee and spreadsheets, two things that had always brought me comfort in my 12 years as a nurse supervisor at Basalt Regional Medical Center. But as I sat in my office that Tuesday morning, reviewing our department's financial records with fresh eyes, both felt like bitter reminders of how naive I'd been. Diana Underwood had been our discharge planner for 3 years, and in that time, she'd become more than just a colleague. She'd been my confidant during budget meetings, my ally when administration pushed for faster patient turnovers, and the person I trusted most when it came to managing our unit's complex financial responsibilities. She managed the unit's staffing budget and overtime assignments with what I'd always assumed was meticulous care. Our friendship had developed naturally. Diana had started at Basalt Regional just 6 months after I'd been promoted to supervisor, and she'd seemed genuinely interested in learning how our department functioned. She'd ask thoughtful questions about patient flow, about how we balanced quality care with financial constraints, about the challenges of maintaining adequate staffing levels in a rural hospital. "Samantha, you make this look so easy," she'd said during her second week, watching me navigate the Epic system to track patient readiness for discharge. "I hope I can be half as organized as you are." That compliment had meant something to me. At 34, I'd worked hard to earn respect in a field where experience often trumped education, where rural hospitals operated on tight margins and every decision carried weight. Diana's admiration had felt genuine, and her eagerness to collaborate had made my job easier. Over the months, our professional relationship had deepened into something that felt like genuine friendship. We'd grab lunch together in the hospital cafeteria, discussing everything from patient care protocols to weekend plans. Diana would often stay late to help me reconcile budget reports, her attention to detail matching my own perfectionist tendencies. "I don't know how you keep track of all these allocations," she'd say, leaning over my shoulder to review the monthly financial summaries. The uniform allowances alone would give me a headache. I'd appreciated her interest in the administrative side of healthcare. Most clinical staff preferred to focus solely on patient care, leaving the financial complexities to supervisors like me. But Diana seemed to understand that good patient outcomes required sound financial management, that every dollar spent on equipment or staffing had to be justified and tracked. The first sign that something wasn't right had come 3 months ago, during a routine audit preparation. I'd been reviewing our department's equipment purchases when I noticed a discrepancy in the uniform allowance records. Nothing dramatic, just a few $100s that didn't align with our actual orders. I'd mentioned it to Diana during one of our coffee breaks. "Oh, that's probably just a timing issue," she'd said, not looking up from her tablet where she was reviewing discharge summaries. "You know how slow the vendor payments can be. I'll look into it." I'd trusted her to handle it. Diana had always been thorough with administrative details, and I had more pressing concerns with staffing shortages and a particularly challenging patient census. But when I'd followed up 2 weeks later, she'd seemed flustered. "I'm still working on it," she'd said, her usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like anxiety. "The accounting department has been backed up with the new system implementation." That explanation had made sense at the time. Basalt Regional had recently upgraded several administrative systems, and everyone was dealing with learning curves and processing delays. But now, looking at months of data spread across my computer screen, I could see patterns that made my chest tight with recognition. The uniform allowances weren't the only discrepancy. Equipment purchases showed similar irregularities, small amounts that had been redirected or reclassified in ways that didn't match our actual needs. Overtime assignments that Diana managed showed subtle manipulations, with certain shifts receiving premium pay rates that didn't align with our established protocols. Each individual incident was small enough to escape notice during routine reviews, but together they painted a picture of systematic manipulation that had been happening for months, possibly longer. And at the center of it all was Diana, the person I'd trusted with some of our department's most sensitive financial responsibilities. I'd spent the morning cross-referencing purchase orders with delivery receipts, comparing budget allocations with actual expenditures. The hope was becoming undeniable, but I kept hoping I was wrong, that there was some explanation I hadn't considered. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Running late this morning. Can you cover the 9 a.m. discharge meeting?" I stared at the message, remembering all the time she'd asked me to cover meetings or handle administrative tasks when she was running behind. How many of those delays had been opportunities for her to manipulate records without oversight? The discharge meeting went smoothly, but I found myself paying attention to details I'd previously overlooked. The way other staff members interacted with Diana when she finally arrived. The casual mentions of budget concerns that I'd dismissed as normal hospital financial stress. Diana's been really helpful with the overtime scheduling, mentioned Jake Morrison, one of our senior nurses. She always seems to know exactly how to maximize our coverage while staying within budget. That comment stuck with me as I returned to my office. Diana did seem to have an unusual grasp of our financial constraints, an almost intuitive understanding of how to work within the system. But what if that understanding came from manipulating the system rather than simply navigating it? By lunchtime, I'd documented enough irregularities to fill 3 pages of notes. The pattern was clear. Small amounts redirected from legitimate expenses, overtime rates adjusted in ways that benefited certain individuals, equipment allowances that didn't match actual purchases. And in every case, Diana had been the common denominator. The hardest part wasn't the itself, it was accepting what the meant. Diana wasn't just a colleague who'd made mistakes or cut corners. She was someone who'd systematically manipulated our department's finances for personal gain, someone who'd used my trust and friendship as cover for what amounted to theft. I thought about all the conversations we'd had about hospital finances, about the challenges of providing quality care with limited resources. Had those discussions been genuine, or had Diana been gathering information to better exploit our systems? Every shared coffee break, every late evening spent reviewing budget reports, every moment of professional camaraderie now felt tainted by the possibility of deception. The afternoon brought more. I'd requested detailed reports from our financial systems, using my supervisor access to dig deeper into transactions that Diana had processed. The manipulation was sophisticated but not perfect. Small discrepancies in timing, minor inconsistencies in coding, patterns that became visible only when viewed across several months of data. As I compiled my findings, I kept thinking about the trust that formed the foundation of healthcare work. Patients trusted us with their lives and their most vulnerable moments. Colleagues trusted each other to maintain professional standards and ethical behavior. Administrators trusted supervisors like me to manage resources responsibly and report problems honestly. Diana had violated all of those trusts, but she'd done it so gradually, so carefully, that it had taken me months to recognize what was happening. The betrayal felt personal, but it was also professional in the deepest sense. A corruption of the principles that made healthcare work possible. By 5 o'clock, I had enough to justify a formal investigation. The question was what to do next. Confronting Diana directly felt dangerous, both professionally and personally. But reporting my suspicions to administration meant potentially destroying the career of someone I had considered a friend, someone who might have explanations I hadn't considered. As I locked my office and prepared to leave for the day, I saw Diana in the parking lot, loading boxes into her car. Our eyes met across the asphalt, and for a moment, I thought I saw something like fear in her expression. Then she smiled and waved, the same warm gesture that had greeted me every morning for 3 years. "See you tomorrow, Samantha," she called out, her voice carrying easily across the mountain air. I waved back, but the gesture felt hollow. Tomorrow, I would have to decide whether to confront the I'd gathered or take it directly to hospital administration. Either way, the comfortable routine of trust and collaboration that had defined our working relationship was about to. The drive home through Lava Springs felt different that evening, the familiar mountain landscape shadowed by the knowledge that someone I'd trusted had been systematically manipulating our department's finances. The betrayal wasn't just about money. It was about the erosion of everything that made healthcare work possible. As I pulled into my driveway, I realized that I'd already made my decision. The prey was too clear, the pattern too deliberate to ignore. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of exposing what Diana had done, knowing that it would change everything about how I understood trust and friendship in professional settings. The mountain silence felt heavy with unspoken truths, and I knew that by the week, nothing at Basalt Regional Medical Center would ever be the same. The next morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that only mountain air could provide, but the weight in my chest made it impossible to appreciate the view of the Sawtooth Range from my office window. I'd spent most of the night rehearsing what I would say to hospital administration, how I would present the I'd gathered about Diana's manipulation of our department's financial systems. At 7:30, I knocked on the door of Chief Financial Officer Marcus Underwood's office. He looked surprised to see me so early, his coffee still steaming on the desk beside quarterly budget reports. "Samantha, what brings you here before rounds?" His tone was friendly but cautious, the way administrators spoke when they sensed potential complications. I placed the printed documentation on his desk. The spreadsheets showing the discrepancies, the timeline of uniform allowance manipulations, the pattern of equipment budget transfers that had enriched Diana's personal accounts while shortchanging our nursing staff. I need to report suspected financial misconduct in our department, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Diana Blackwood has been manipulating uniform and equipment allowances for personal gain. Marcus's expression shifted from surprise to concern as he reviewed the documents. The silence stretched between us, broken only by the distant sound of morning shift change announcements echoing through the hospital corridors. These are serious allegations, Samantha. You understand the implications of what you're suggesting? I understand that nurses in our department have been denied proper equipment allowances, while Diana has been receiving unauthorized payments, I replied. I understand that this represents a fundamental breach of trust and professional ethics. He nodded slowly, his administrative mind already calculating the potential ramifications. I'll need to involve human resources and potentially external auditors. This kind of investigation requires careful documentation and proper procedures. Within 2 hours, I found myself in a conference room with HR Director Jennifer Whitmore and Internal Audit Manager Robert Chambers. The sterile environment felt appropriate for dissecting the betrayal that had been festering in our department for months. Walk us through your discovery process, Jennifer requested, her pen poised over a legal pad. When did you first notice irregularities? I explained the timeline. The denied uniform requests, the equipment shortages, the gradual realization that our budget allocations weren't matching our actual needs. As I spoke, I could see the gravity of the situation registering on their faces. Did you discuss these concerns with Ms. Blackwood directly before bringing them to administration? Robert asked. No. The pattern suggested deliberate manipulation rather than administrative error. I felt it was important to document everything before any confrontation that might compromise the investigation moved quickly once formal procedures began. By afternoon, Diana had been called to meet with HR while I continued my regular duties, trying to maintain normalcy while knowing that everything was about to change. It was during the 3 o'clock medication pass that I encountered my first real support. Nurse manager Patricia Greenwood approached me at the medication cart, her expression thoughtful. I heard about the investigation, she said quietly, checking to ensure we weren't overheard. I want you to know that several of us have noticed irregularities over the past year. You were brave to speak up. Her words provided the first real relief I'd felt since discovering Diana's betrayal. I was worried I might be wrong, that there could be explanations I hadn't considered. The equipment shortages have been affecting patient care, Patricia continued. We've been making do with outdated supplies while being told the budget couldn't accommodate replacements. If Diana was diverting those funds, then you've potentially prevented harm to our patients. That perspective shifted something fundamental in my understanding of the situation. This wasn't just about financial misconduct. It was about the integrity of patient care itself. The confrontation came sooner than expected. At 4:15, as I was updating patient charts in the nurse's station, Diana appeared beside my desk. Her usual warm demeanor had been replaced by something harder, more desperate. We need to talk, she said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. I looked up from my computer screen, meeting her eyes for the first time since discovering her betrayal. I think we do. We walked to an empty patient room, the afternoon light filtering through the windows, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. Diana closed the door behind us, and for a moment, the silence felt suffocating. You went to administration, she said finally. It wasn't a question. I reported financial irregularities that I discovered during routine budget review, I replied, maintaining professional distance despite the personal pain of the conversation. You don't understand the pressure I've been under, Diana said, her composure beginning to crack. My husband lost his job 6 months ago. My daughter's college tuition, the mortgage payments. I was drowning financially. So you decided to steal from our department's budget? To deny nurses the equipment allowances they'd earned? It wasn't stealing, she protested, though her voice lacked conviction. I was going to pay it back once things stabilized. I never intended for it to affect patient care. But it did affect patient care, I said, thinking of Patricia's words about outdated equipment and supply shortages. Every dollar you diverted was a dollar that couldn't be used for the resources our patients needed. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, Diana alternating between justification and pleading, while I maintained the professional boundaries that the situation demanded. When we finally left the room, I knew that our friendship, whatever it had been, was irretrievably damaged. The investigation concluded within a week. External auditors confirmed the financial irregularities, documenting a pattern of unauthorized transfers totaling nearly $15,000 over 8 months. Diana was terminated immediately, with the hospital pursuing both civil recovery and potential criminal charges. The aftermath brought unexpected changes to our department. Patricia Greenwood was promoted to interim discharge planning coordinator, bringing a transparency to budget management that had been missing. New oversight procedures were implemented, requiring dual authorization for any financial transfers above specified thresholds. But the personal cost of exposing the betrayal lingered. Other staff members who had been friendly with Diana treated me with a mixture of respect and wariness, as if my willingness to report misconduct made me a potential threat to any future indiscretions. The easy camaraderie that had once characterized our work environment was replaced by a more formal, cautious professionalism. 3 weeks after Diana's termination, I received a letter from her attorney threatening legal action for what they termed malicious prosecution and damage to professional reputation. The hospital's legal department assured me that my actions had been appropriate and that they would defend against any frivolous claims, but the threat added another layer of stress to an already difficult situation. The most challenging aspect was reconciling my understanding of Diana as a person with her actions as a professional. The woman who had mentored new staff members and advocated for patient needs was the same person who had systematically stolen from our department's budget. The contradiction forced me to reconsider how well we ever really know our colleagues, how trust in professional settings requires constant vigilance rather than blind faith. As autumn settled over Lava Springs, bringing the first snow to the mountain peaks visible from the hospital windows, I found myself changed by the experience. The betrayal had taught me that professional integrity sometimes required difficult choices, that loyalty to institutional values might conflict with personal relationships. The investigation was complete, justice had been served, but the silence that followed felt heavy, with unresolved questions about trust, friendship, and the price of doing what was right in a world where personal and professional boundaries often blurred beyond recognition.